Welcome to Punchcast, the founder-focused interview series where we've sat down with legitimate unicorn founders, leaders from billion-dollar funds, and CEOs with nine-figure exits. Today's episode features Ellen Chisa, partner at Bold Start Ventures. Ellen invests at inception, often before product or pitch deck, backing bold technical founders from day one. Bold Start recently closed a $250 million fund and now has over $1.1 billion under management with a portfolio that includes Clay, Customer, Snyk, Superhuman, and other category-defining companies. Ellen's an HBS alum, was a founder herself, and brings that builder perspective to her investing. Let's dive in. Ellen, pleasure to have you here on Punchcast.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, indeed. And really looking forward to getting to share all of your insights you've extracted both as a founder and now investor. Really unique perspective. Just to get into the journey, your childhood, you grew up in the Detroit, Michigan area, always interested in science and technology. How did that shape you? And I mean, you've accomplished so much. It's going to be hard for the audience to track, I suppose.
I'll try to pull it into some themes over time. But I think definitely growing up in Michigan, it is a very technical area. I spent a lot of time doing things like Science Olympiad and Math Olympiad and first robotics. And I think it was really seeing how much joy technical people around me also got out of their work. Like our high school robotics team, we had one machinist we worked with all the time. We had one design engineer who worked at Delphi that we worked with all the time. And then we also had our coach who was a real estate agent, but spent a ton of her time on robotics. And just seeing how much meaning everyone still got out of those projects, even alongside their career, was really cool. And I think it really showcased for me how exciting it is to be someone who actually makes stuff that changes how the world works.
Right. And you've gone so far as to invent your own programming language.
Yes, I actually, when I talk to my friends about that, I always talk about how that, like, it really did seem like the sort of thing that, like, my family wanted me to be doing is just, like, coming up with something out of nowhere, like, de novo and just building it yourself. I always kind of think of it as, like, the mad scientist in the basement kind of thing. And I think that definitely is one piece of startups is people having this idea and having the genesis. And then I think there's, of course, the entire other part of collaborating with other people and understanding your users and like working to scale something. And so I feel like, yeah.
Okay, so
Really.
if I understood correctly, this is something you believe your parents would have expected out of you?
Yeah. I don't know if expected is the right word, but yes, wanted, perhaps. My parents very much wanted me to be technical, really wanted me to go to engineering school, supported me wholeheartedly in that journey. The engineering school I went to when I went wasn't even accredited yet. And so I think a lot of people's parents of that time period would have been kind of like, hey, what are you doing going to the school no one has ever heard of that has no alumni, that has no accreditation? Whereas like my parents were like all in from the first time they went there.
Okay, yeah. Well, what were they? I mean, what's their background? I haven't caught that yet because
Oh, yeah.
you're at the fringes. I just don't know where that. I mean, being an engineer is different than being an engineer at a startup and working at a venture capital firm.
This is definitely true, yes. So I would say, so my dad had a startup while I was growing up. I think this must have been a very challenging household situation now having my own little kid, but my dad was starting a data interchange company in the early 90s. And then my mother at the time was up for tenure and she's a professor of organizational behavior. And so I think you can kind of see how both of those things filtered into the type of work that I do now.
Okay, so overall, what are those defining moments that made you Ellen the investor?
Yeah, I think most of those, I was thinking about this, come a little bit later. So one of them for me, I think a big piece of being an investor is looking at a lot of different companies and kind of saying like, hey, there's like so many, like there's infinite things people can do in the world that would be interesting. And it's kind of saying, of the infinite things, which ones do I think we can move the needle on? And I think the first experience I really had with that, my first job out of undergrad, I lived in Seattle and I worked at Microsoft. But in my free time, I was the dean of an organization called Awesome Seattle. And it was a subchapter of the Awesome Foundation. And so every month we would get 10 people together who would each kick in $100 and then we would give a $1,000 grant to an interesting project. And so every month we had hundreds of applications that we read through as a group. And it was sort of like the same dynamics as you have in a partnership, obviously much lower amounts of capital, but kind of like, okay, which of these projects do we really want to see live in the world? Which of these people do we really want to back and spend time with? And like, how do we get all 10 of us to agree on that?
I'm already seeing parallels to Bold Start, given you're so early on with your inception program. How do you suss out what makes a good company? I mean, we can delve into this later and go back and forth, but I'm just intrigued now that we're on this point.
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of it is about like the person. Like I would say it's usually, I think of it as being three things, and like two of these I think are very, very common with every venture capitalist who invests at the beginning, but like it's obviously the founder. And then it's the market that they are going at, and if it's going to be large and venture scale. And then it's for me, it's always been a little hard to describe, but there's something about that initial hypothesis the founder has and how they think about product and how they think about building. And for me, that's like the real crux of how I understand how someone works and what I think they'll be able to do. And so I try to spend a lot of time on that.
Right,
Uh,
right.
to give you an off foundation example, one of the projects we backed that like really stuck with me is we backed a woman, Michelle Del Carlo, who wanted to have a pop-up museum and like allow people to bring things in and share their own stories. And she was the sort of person where she like ran this prototype with our original grant, and then the Smithsonian hired her to do pop-up museums. And so then it became like a thing that became like much more common at other museums.
Oh, okay.
And so like obviously pop-up museums are not a venture scale company, but you can kind of see that same like, oh, our original hypothesis was just local pop-up museum at the library, and then it turned into something much bigger. And I think that's how inception stage companies work as well.
Okay, 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 okay. So interesting. Yeah, I mean, how many programs like that exist around the US, the one you were part of?
Yeah, so Foundation, I think there's probably somewhere between 50 and 100 chapters now.
Okay, cool. So
Yeah.
you were at Microsoft, and prior to HBS, you were at Kickstarter on a leave of absence or something. You were reflecting as to what your path, how that would take shape. So,
Yeah, yeah. So I was at Microsoft and I was doing this awesome foundation thing. And then if you kind of imagine putting this software job and this awesome foundation thing together into one thing, you would kind of come up with Kickstarter. And so I was like, oh, these are the two things I love. I should obviously go work at Kickstarter. And so I spent like 6 months of my life just trying to get a job at Kickstarter. That was like the main focus for me for a while, which I loved. And obviously, like, I think the thing that was actually quite different about that is I think a lot of people, especially in tech, think of Kickstarter as a place for startups. I actually much more think of Kickstarter as a place for artists. And so I think I learned a lot more about the art and the creative process while I was there, and kind of the more subjective nature of everything a founder has to do. Like, I think good startups are very rarely a linear, like, set of problems that like any smart person would look at and go, we do this, then we do this, then we do this. Cause like if it was that linear, everyone would do it. It would be easy. It wouldn't be so hard. And so I think there is a lot more subjectivity than people often give startups credit for. And I think that really hit home for me at Kickstarter.
right. When I'm hearing the Smithsonian, these grants, your background in ed tech, travel, there's a lot there that isn't necessarily venture scale, or of course it's hard to pull off, and you respect that alone. Are you able to, because now you're investing in companies that are reaching unicorn status, so if I'm not mistaken, please do highlight the ones that are really taken off within your portfolio. But are you able to express that somehow uniquely at Bold Start, that creativity?
Yeah. I would say at Bold Start, like the way we think about this is we only invest in Inception, which is something that's very important to me. If you think of someone who's a public market investor, chances are they're coming through the balance sheet, they're looking at an income statement, they're thinking about revenue multiples, like they're spending a lot of time on quantitative work. And I think that like I respect that discipline a lot. We spend a lot of time on that at HBS. It's a thing. But when you're looking at a company at inception, that's not what you can't look at that. That doesn't exist. There's nothing. Often the companies aren't even incorporated yet. You're really just looking at like person and idea and space. Um, and I think for me, kind of what we were saying about before, it's like there's founder, there's market, and then there's this, how is this founder going to attack this market? And that last piece, I really feel like is quite consistent across venture scale and not venture scale projects.
Yeah, now we're in this era of AI agents, which again we'll dive into that. But before we get into all of the investing, just want to understand your founder journey. What was it
Mhm.
like going from 0 to 1? Your first fundraising experience? What would you relay to, or what do you relay compellingly to founders now? I'm sure they take you seriously.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the 0 to 1 is kind of funny. I definitely remember my, like, first day 0 where I was like and, like, I'd just been employee 1 at a startup. It wasn't like I'd never done the startup thing before. It was like I'd done it somewhat recently, and I just remember sitting, like, here at my desk in this house being like, "Oh, it's just me and my co-founder now. We can do anything, anything." And then I was like, "Well, we don't own a whiteboard. I guess it's my job to buy the whiteboard now." And then I was like, "Well, we're, like, very much looking at this programming language space. We're thinking about backends." This was kind of during the era where GraphQL was becoming much more popular than REST for API management. And I was like, I think we need to know about this GraphQL thing. So I guess I'll research this for a little bit. And I feel like that 0 day is kind of suddenly you can do anything and it becomes your own job to rein in all of those ideas. There's like much less of a consistent direction. And so I think that's like one very big challenging thing about the beginning. I'm actually running an experiment on this right now where since at BuildStart, we're working with people at inception rather than having something that's like a 3-month accelerator or something that takes a bunch of equity or like requires you to raise venture off the bat. We're trying a 2-week inception bootcamp program where we just get people in for those like first couple of weeks after they've decided to get started and put them with a cohort of other people at the same time for the emotional support. And then I'll also have some like tangible things to hook off of and kind of get going. Because I feel like once you get through that like initial like, whoa, I'm here now, you have momentum that you can build off of. So like kind of helping people get that momentum going in a couple of week program.
You're evidently excited by that. So I want to double click, but just for our audience, provide a summary if you could. You do it much more aptly than I, and where you sit now.
Oh yeah. I like that we've gone through like my childhood and my early career. And then so now I'm a partner of Bold Start Ventures. And I've said inception a bunch of times because we consider ourselves inception investors. We lead rounds at inception, and that can mean a variety of things. We say inception because like those rounds don't all look the same. We work with people who say, I want to minimize dilution. I'm really thinking of this as almost more like an angel round, but I want to have you involved. Maybe it's a 500K round. We also see third-time founders come through, working in a market they know, just to have the experience to be able to raise more capital off the bat. And so maybe an inception round is a $10 million round. And we think it's important that we can work with founders regardless of the right capital strategy for their company at the get-go moment. And then apart from that, we're an enterprise-focused fund, which generally means one proxy I use is most of our companies at some point a Fortune 500 company might be a customer. But that's not something that has to be immediate. It's probably not your first customer, but generally business leaning.
Got it. So in terms of portfolio support, tell us a little bit more about this 2-week-long program. What excites you most? Yeah, unpack that.
Yeah. So portfolio support. So the 2-week program is totally separate from the within the portfolio. So within the portfolio, you have the advantage of you can call me or any of my 3 partners whenever you want, and all of us have slightly different skill sets, so we all support everyone together. But the program was much more of saying, hey, like we know that we are good at inception. We spent a lot of time working with people in the portfolio on it. We want to be able to have a little bit more time with a broader set of companies and be able to kind of help people as they're getting going, even if it's not necessarily immediate the right fit for the Bold Start core portfolio and investment strategy. And so this is a kind of a separate thing that we're trying to just see how it works out in the ecosystem.
What's this angle on emotional backing?
Yeah, I mean, I think you've probably seen this before. There's this video of a guy who like just starts dancing in a park, and everyone's kind of looking at him like he's weird, and then one other person comes up and starts dancing with him, like the first follower thing. I feel like being a founder, the emotional part is sort of like, who are those first people who believe? And I think that can be the first people who are writing you checks and saying like, yeah, I see the same mission you see. I want to row in that same direction. It can be those first few people who say like, yeah, I do want to be your first couple of employees. It can be your like personal community saying like, yeah, I believe in you, quit what you were doing and like go build this thing. And so I think emotional support for founders can come from a variety of angles. But I think if you're having the audacity to go and try to do something no one has ever done before, like, yeah, you're going to need that from somewhere.
And there's at least one example I can recall, but I'd love to have you detail it all. As far as founders you've backed multiple times. So evidently something's going well over there. They respect you.
Yeah. I think one of the examples would be at Bold Start, we worked with Guy Bajarni, who is probably best known as the founder of Snyk. And we'd actually worked with Guy on his first company, Blaze, that was acquired by Akamai. Then my partners worked with him again on Snyk, and then we're now working with him on his third company, Tessel.
Right. And Snyk did hit a unicorn valuation, at least at some juncture. So there's some substance there, certainly. And we have had the privilege, coincidentally, of co-investing in CrewAI and CodeFlash.
Yes.
What drew you to them? What lessons have you learned?
Yeah, for sure. So I guess maybe starting with CodeFlash, I feel like that's one where it's really interesting because I feel like the founder saw something before most other people did. And so I think now everyone talks about the proliferation of code that's been written by AI. But when you and I and Saurabh all started working together on CodeFlash, like no one was talking about this. This was not the topic close at hand. Um, but his vision has always been, hey, if we're going to have a ton of code, it might not be as optimal as code that was written by humans. We're going to need to continue to improve it. And so he is dived in, laser focused on this problem of code optimization for performance.
Mm-hmm. And what about Crew?
Yeah, Crew. So CrewAI, for those who don't know, I think most people, I know here that people see them every single week at an event in San Francisco. So I need to people seem to have heard of the brand, which at the beginning, again, wasn't true. But CrewAI is an agent orchestration framework and control plane. And the thing that really drew me to Joao and the tooling at the beginning was just how easy it is to get set up. Like I am fairly technical. I did make a programming language, but it's not the thing I do day to day anymore. And so when Joao came in and was like, hey, I started setting up crews to do this. The first thing I did was like, while we were still on the call, I was like, I'm going to make a little crew of agents that are like wearing a variety of hats for making an investment decision, and have one analyze the market size, and have one think about like the approach to the first product, and have one who just disagrees with everything no matter what it was. And I could like get up and going with my little crew of fake investors, like while we were still talking to Joao. And so like that level of developer experience focus, and like that clarity of product vision really stood out.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, so as far as just going back to the founders you back, and that being the number one factor, of course, in an early stage decision, what's the whole bit about non-obvious founders? You've written, do you want to just describe that in a bit more detail?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I feel like
What's an example of a company or founder comes to mind?
I don't know if I have a specific example, but I think one of the things is there's sort of this idea of like, oh, you like maybe worked at a FANG company for a couple years as a PM, and then you sat down with your friend from the engineering team, and then you made a list of all of the spaces, and then you came up with a startup. And like I think that that's like kind of a model people have of like what a founder is, or like people will look at the Forbes 30 under 30 list and be like, all founders are like this. And I think that's certainly not true. It hasn't been true for the majority of founders I've worked with as an operator or from the investing side. And so when I think about this, you kind of want someone who just has a problem that they really understand and they have unfair insight in. I think people usually call it founder market fit. And the rest of kind of like the trappings or like the like pedigree around it, I think matters much less when you see that intersection between why is this person solving this problem and do they have the skill set to like approach it and think through their entry point.
Sure, and part of the reason I ask is João, if I'm pronouncing that properly, Joao, but it's like an N at the end, from Sao Paulo, or Brazil anyway. Granted, he was the former director of AI engineering at Clearbit, which exited for 150 million to HubSpot. We all know, but being from, and this happens sometimes, as I understand, at least with LATAM-oriented funds, if they're investing in founders from the Southern Hemisphere, go into the States, they require degrees from Stanford and so forth. That's, again, not necessarily the standard startup founder mold from that geography. So just my 2 cents there, but it's, yeah, it's nice to have a contrarian approach and not just follow what's out there in the Forbes 30 and 30. AI, back to that. It's evolving at a breakneck pace. How do you think it will change the way enterprise startups are built and scaled over the next 3 to 5 years?
Yeah, I mean, I can't have a podcast without talking about AI in 2025.
Got it.
I don't know if I have anything like terribly new, but I think there's like a few things we're definitely seeing. I think for one, we're seeing very small teams be able to get huge amounts of traction very quickly, where you're seeing teams of 20 people be able to get to $100 million of revenue. That's something that just, we didn't see at all before. And so I think that like really lowers the bar for starting a new software businesses, which I think is great. Like, I think you don't need to raise as much capital necessarily to build a great enterprise company. You can stay focused, you can grow very quickly. So I think that's definitely one. I think similarly, if it becomes easier and easier to build software, like that's less of an inherent moat by itself. And so then it becomes like, hey, what is the differentiation you have that creates a moat for you that isn't just what you've built? That could be distribution based, it could be relationship based, it could be something else, but that's another piece. And so I think those are kind of like the two biggest trends that we've generally been seeing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay.
What I mean, I'm sure you're seeing the same thing. What have you been noticing?
Well, we had Daniel Sachs on. He's a unicorn founder behind AppDirect and is now, he raised a $12.5 million seed round, mega seed, co-led by 8VC, in the AI agents GTM space, and would love actually to run informal Zoom calls with your founders in the case that's at all of interest. But well, just stealing from him, he's saying he's tacking on, he's acquiring such companies and building them in, given it's all working at the pace is frenetic and it's evolving at just such a fast clip. It's really hard to predict where the winners will be, especially given there's a lack of a technical moat. Perhaps you'd be able to speak to that much more expertly than I, but it might very well be about distribution at the end of the day. And specifically targeting verticals that incumbents can't overcome.
I agree. That's another thing I should have remarked on this. I think one of the things we're seeing is that there is the advantage many incumbents have in this wave of they have a bunch of data and they have a bunch of workflows already there that they can build AI on top of. I think their challenge is how do they make that experience good? And I think a lot of that will be using new tooling like a Crew if they're thinking about agentic workflows, like a LiveBlocks if they're thinking about how to add that into their experience layer. And then we've also, my partner Ed sometimes calls them Goldilocks startups, of startups that have been going for long enough that they have some amount of data, but they're still nimble enough that they can add AI workflows quite quickly and natively. And I think both of those groups do at moments have an advantage over a startup that's trying to just build something where they might have a very cool workflow, but getting something to click and be sticky for people and grow fast enough is still fundamentally a very hard problem.
Yeah. Speaking of hard problems, it's difficult, I can imagine, as an introvert to function in a space in which you're constantly chatting with, like, the threads you have are infinite. Something else you've spoken about, but how do you thrive? In fact, do you even maybe have a certain habit? Because I see you're quite successful and productive altogether. You're
Thank you. I try.
yeah, you evidently do and succeed. So what is it? What's that X factor you possess, Ellen?
Oh. I feel as though I don't know if I have much of an X factor. I am sometimes told I should be more approachable and nicer, and I'm always working on it. I think I definitely, one of the things that's hard is like a large part of being a VC is just being out there and meeting new people continuously. And so I think it's really about thinking about who you want to be meeting and who you want to be spending the time with and where you're going to draw the energy from and how you balance that out. And like one of the things I've just noticed in my social life is like I get to talk to you now. This is great. And before this, I was talking to a founder who's solving a super interesting problem. And like I'm talking to another founder of the portfolio later this afternoon and I'm super excited about it. But like if you do that all day at work, it's not like you get to 6 o'clock and you're like, oh, I'm like really craving some more social interaction. Whereas a lot of my like close friends are infrastructure engineers. And we've compared this before. I meet 3 new people a day most days. And I have many friends who are like, oh yeah, I meet maybe 1 new person every 3 weeks. And so sort of it just like the difference in that load is just that like I'm not going to be saying like, oh hey, like let's go out to the bar and talk to a bunch of strangers because like it's just not something that's going to give me more energy after I've already spent a ton of time talking to people. And so I generally just try to be really intentional about it. And that can mean like if I go to an event, I might go knowing I really want to catch up with one person and that's what's going to make it worthwhile. And then I'll try to meet like 1 or 2 new interesting people. And then if after an hour, I realize I'm no longer being a good conversational participant or like I'm not fun for people to meet anymore because I'm drained, like I can call it and I can go home. And so I think it's sort of, you can only do as much as you can do. And so like kind of when you hit that wall of how much time you can spend with people, you kind of have to go like, okay, I'm no longer showing up the way I would want someone to show up for me.
Oh, okay, that's reflective. Are you able, granted you have a family, as far as hobbies and your creative pursuits of the past, do you journal regularly? Do you rollerblade? What's in the Boston area?
Rollerblading would be very funny because I'm like extremely uncoordinated person, but I like the image because it would be funny. I do triathlon as kind of my primary hobby.
No. Really?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, that's intense.
I'm kind of I'm expecting a second kid at the beginning of May and we're recording in March, so I'm kind of out of prime training season right now. But yeah, last summer I did 2 half Ironmans.
Insane. Yeah, I've just begun cycling, which is good. Just, a bit of zone 2 out of 5 cardio, they say, good for fat burning. Sneaking that into my commute. So that routine is established anyways, but I could never pretend.
You could. You definitely could. I feel like anyone could do it if they really wanted to. It's sort of just like one sport at a time. If you got the cycling,
Mm.
you'd probably do the running. And then it's sort of learning to swim is perhaps the one that most people struggle with.
Well, segueing a little bit, it's a natural one to health. I've begun intermittent fasting and have found immense benefits. Others around me have as well. What helps you operate at such a fast clip? Is it your diet? Is it just genetic? I mean, granted, you're HBS alum, but
Uh,
you're one of the most. I think it just appears this way. You're extremely intellectually curious. You read a lot of books. I just want to get to.
I do read a lot of books. Okay, so I think I am. We talk about this a lot. My husband is even higher energy than I am, and he's much more chill about it. But I think both of us were blessed with high energy disposition, and I've definitely now seen this in our toddler as well, extremely high energy toddler. So I think part of it is just like lucky. And then I think part of it is I do actually I sleep a lot compared to many people. I did not sleep for kind of like most of high school and college and like ran it very, I don't know, close to the wire, and it was fine. And then kind of now I found to do the like quality of intellectual thought I want to do, I have to sleep 8 hours a night, and that's fine. So I do that. I wear a Whoop, which gives you a bunch of really interesting, nice, yeah, data. But one of the things I've learned is actually when I read before in bed, my HRV is like 40% higher than if I don't, which is insane. Like the Whoop data is like statistically, this should make like a 2% impact. And for me, it's a huge impact. And I kind of found my way to the reading before Whoop, but I think it is there's something for some reason in my physiology that reading matters a lot. And so I do a lot of it.
Well, yeah, I'm personally encouraged by that highly, given that's my one of 3 goals that I haven't quite mastered, as far as what you can build in the Whoop as far as your routine. So
Reading one of
yeah,
100 list.
yeah, for sure, for sure.
Read what you like. I feel like it's the easiest way to read more, is I feel like people are like, "Oh, I'm gonna read, like, the book everyone is recommending." Like, for a while, everyone was like, "Oh, everyone's gonna read Thinking Fast and Slow," which, like, Thinking Fast and Slow is a, like, very dense book. Whereas if you're like, "Oh, I'm just gonna read, like, a fun story, or I'm gonna read, like, literary fiction that came out that I'm excited about," like, I don't know, it helps you get in the habit. And then later, if you wanna read something more challenging, it becomes much easier.
I've even received the opposite advice to read something that you would find boring so you fall asleep. In any regard,
Yeah. You can also do that.
yeah, yeah.
I try to keep one of those around, but yeah.
Okay, okay. And so back to Bold Start, if I may.
Yeah.
We'll go toward the rapid fire round, just a bunch of fun questions and so forth. Nonetheless, let's dig into this a bit because I want to understand more about your motivations 5 years down the road. Where is Bold Start? Where are you? I mean, you're already a partner. What's left?
It's actually funny. Last year I kind of started thinking about what my motivations were 5 years down the line. And I think especially if you look at kind of um startups like go in cycles, and there's markets that are particularly good at particular moments in time. And so like if you look at Bold Start's 4th fund, we have a ton of infrastructure companies in that fund. And it was a very interesting time for infrastructure. And I feel like I was like, oh, like, yeah, there's definitely some aspects of like I love infrastructure companies. I love working with LiveBlocks. I love working with Zupla, which is an API gateway company that I invested in.
And you're
But letting Yeah, yeah. But like uh infrastructure isn't the only thing I find interesting. And I was kind of like, well, we're an inception fund and we're an enterprise fund. I don't think this means we can only do infrastructure. And like that was never the goal. That was just sort of where we'd seen a lot of opportunity. And so it's kind of like, okay, like over the next 5 years, sure, we have cybersecurity with the applications, we have infrastructure, but I think there's going to be more things that end up touching the real world that will be interesting for us as well. And so in my head, I was kind of like, 5-year goal, start thinking about some of more of these like robotics or tech bio opportunities that still have a huge software component, but especially being in Boston, it seemed like a natural fit, and also with my technical background. And that was the 5-year goal. And then I got you to invest in a robotics company and a bio company last year, as well as a couple other things that I can't talk about yet that are also kind of more leaning towards physical world implications. And I was like, oh, well, I guess my 5-year goal was actually a 1-year goal. And so now sort of it's more about, I mean, continuing to double down on those same things and work with people at inception and to just really help them succeed. But I think really happy that we've been able to kind of do that with their core like Inception enterprise platform.
Yeah, you're pretty firmly situated on a fourth fund. And
Oh yeah, we're actually we're investing out of our sixth fund now. So the fourth fund was we just finished the fourth fund around the time I joined 4 years ago.
okay, and how long has the fund been around altogether?
2010. So 15 years.
Okay. Yeah, a fair bit then, indeed. Okay. Yeah, and Ed was on the minus list as of.
United C plus, yeah. Yeah, so I our internal joke is that I picked a very good time to join the fund. I think our fourth fund was probably the most challenging of the funds. I feel like you're always kind of, especially investing so early at inception, you don't necessarily have huge returns right away because companies we work with, Life, for instance, a great company based in New York, Elliot wrote the original inception check in 2016. And there was like a long period of time. And then kind of in the last couple of years, they've really broken out and they're a startup that everyone knows. But like that was 7 years before everyone else saw what Elliot could see at the beginning.
Yeah.
And so I think that's like one of the, it can be challenging to be an inception fund for that reason. And so for me, I'm still working with a lot of people who are relatively early in that journey. And so for me, one of the things that's really exciting about the next 5 or 10 years is we'll start to see more things like that.
Hmm. And you do have programming in Miami, of all places, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, so I guess I should have mentioned this. The other thing that's like the reason I wanted to lean into being in Boston, both for this Inception boot camp and for some of the technical areas that are interesting here, is our fund is fully distributed. Um, and so I'm here in Boston. Our partner Showmex in San Francisco. Ed, who you mentioned, one of our two founding partners, is in Miami, and then Elliot is also in Miami, but grew up in New York and like has a super deep network there as well. And so, kind of between the four of us, we get to see a lot of different areas.
And if you were, speaking of traveling left and right and covering a lot of land there, if you were to, because you started your career as a travel agent, there was a hobby period
Yeah.
you dabbled. Yeah, so
Yeah, yeah. So basically, what happened was I was at HBS, and then I ended up being an EIR intern, which is a very weird job title, where I was supposed to be hanging out for 3 months in this incubator doing whatever. And it was in the last wave of AI, so it's been super relevant again recently. And I was working with Paul English, who founded Kayak, and we were kind of like, oh, like we were looking at AI personal assistants, and then he founded Kayak. So we're like, oh, maybe AI personal assistants for travel specifically. And this was kind of like right around when the Amazon Alexa was coming out. And so I was kind of like, okay, like we're going to try to automate this profession and like maybe not fully automate, but like augment. We always thought of it as augmentation. We were building like a suite of power tools for those travel agents. We should like know what it's like to actually be a travel agent. And so I went to travel agent school, and then I was like our de facto first travel agent in the office. And I booked travel for everyone else who was around. So that was super interesting. But it's been really interesting to see that come back again because I know a lot of the nuances and contours of that problem. And I think people often underestimate the human elements that go into it. So like anytime I see an AI demo where people are like, oh, you just tell the AI I want to flight to New York next week and it gives you the right answer. I'm like, that's actually extremely hard. And the fact that you're using this as an easy demo means you haven't thought that hard about what your demo feature is. And so it's been like really interesting to kind of use that as something to look at this wave of Gen AI.
fair enough. That confluence of factors. What would, if you were to build a startup in the travel space today, how would you do it differently?
Oh man, the travel space is so hard. There are a lot of things people don't understand about building in the travel space. A big one is like the legacy backend systems are actually quite difficult to integrate with. So I think I would probably try to avoid that section of it as much as possible. I know a founder who's building in the space who I think is very exciting, but it's still fully stealthy, so I can't talk about that yet. But yeah, there are definitely opportunities there.
Cool. And a piece of conventional wisdom in tech or venture, kind of speed round here, that you find wrong.
It's so funny. I feel like I've gotten much less conventional venture advice than many people have gotten just by like the nature of our fund. We're all kind of like do it your own way, which I really respect and appreciate. With trying to tech advice, I think there is like a fair amount of people kind of thinking that there's like one step and then one next step, or like, oh, you know, the one that people think there's a right time to be a founder is definitely like there's not. It's sort of like the right time is when you see that thing that only you can do and that you think it's the right time in the market. And like when that hits, like I would do my best to make it happen no matter what else is going on.
Mhm, mhm, mhm. Fair. Yeah. So do you, as far as decision making and check writing, is it consensus based?
No, I feel like I think people always like say there's a spectrum of like some shops are conviction based where one person just does it, and some shops are consensus based where everyone has to agree. I don't think we're either end of the spectrum. I'd say like generally the person who's joining your board and you're to work with all the time, you want them to be like fully aligned with you. And so like I'm always looking for that level of conviction in myself. But I take it very seriously if one of my partners looks at something and doesn't like can't see what I see.
Hmm. And as far as board seats, do you have to write a check of a certain size to command that presence?
It's I mean generally when we do write checks, we're generally only leading, and so if the round is a price round and we're establishing a board, generally that would be part of it. If a founder is really focused more on like what is an angel round, and maybe they're like, okay, we're gonna do this on a safe, it's gonna be quick, it's only gonna be 500K. Like that's not necessarily a thing where we'd be like, no, we have to establish a board for that dynamic. So I think it tends more towards what is the nature of the round versus what is the check size.
Mhm, mhm. Okay. And, do you expect, I mean, is there anyone else, I'm just curious, in your family who has these proclivities as well to build and to do, a million things and do them well and, become a thought leader that if you can explain that.
No. I think there's a proclivity in my family to love your work, and your work is a very important part of my life. My grandmother was a dermatologist, which obviously quite unusual for a woman to be able to go to medical school at the time that she did. I think she was one of four in her class. And she worked through when she was, I think, 85 before she decided to stop seeing patients. My aunt has her PhD in human genetics. My mom, obviously, PhD in org behavior and tenured professor for a long time at her university. My dad had a startup. So it's sort of like everyone has their work and it's very meaningful. And my brother's a product manager as well, then spends a ton of time on improv comedy. So I think, yeah, like real depth of respect for the work, but all different disciplines.
Okay. And maybe on a closing note, how would you describe your mission at the core of it? We could crystallize what keeps you motivated and going.
I really want people to have all of the types of resources they need to make interesting things in the world. And so, like, capital is one of those, which is always in that. Access to education is one that didn't come up as much today, but I care very much about that. And then access to tooling. Like, part of why I like programming languages is I feel like the world will be a better place when everyone can create software than when it is like limited to most people have to have their idea translated through a software person. So I think access to capital tooling and knowledge that people need to unleash creativity.
All right. Well, you are in the perfect place at Bold Start. You've got a long way ahead of you with a clear runway. So much continued success over there. It's been a pleasure to have you, to host you, and to feature your story.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm excited to spend more time together and keep collaborating for the sake of Crew and CodeFlash.
Indeed.